政府當局。
If members and the administration are now ready, we shall resume our meeting. Moving on now to the next item, which is the consultation on the 2014-2015 budget. As in the past, all members of the Council have been invited to join our discussion on this item. So I will first invite the FS to speak. Earlier, the FS already tabled a paper for us. Mr. Secretary, thank you. I'm very pleased to come here to listen to members' views regarding the 2014-2015 budget. As in the past, the government policy address. The government will launch a consultation on the budget and the policy address so that we can have good coordination between resource allocation and policy planning. The budget plans for the revenue expenditure for the government for next year. On the one hand, we need to provide financial resources to complement the initiatives proposed in the policy address, and also we should also come up with measures to ensure that there will be a balanced development of the Hong Kong economy. During the last session, I already reported to you on the latest situation of the Hong Kong economy. During the first half of the year, we registered modest economic growth, but the global economy is still faced with all kinds of uncertainties, and therefore we need to adopt timely and appropriate measures in case the external environment, in order to should pose any challenges. And we also need to maintain a stable financial situation in the face of future challenges. I think the population is now aging, and from $80,000, the number of those over the age of 60 will go up to 2.4 million in 2030, and the dependency ratio will drop below 2 to 1. With the projected slowing down in the economic growth and also a drop in government revenue, I think the burden will be bigger and bigger. People are saying that we have more than $700 billion of fiscal reserve that can help resolve all problems. I think we understand that this figure reflects the total cash balance for the government, other than meeting the daily expenditure needs and also the committed projects which have already been paid for. We also have to be prepared for any challenges. So the government must therefore adopt a prudent approach. Our consultation on the budget has already started for some time, and today I hope I'll listen more to the views of members and other people in the community, so that in order to help me prepare the budget. Before we listen to members' views, I'll ask the Secretary to first elaborate on the budget. So there are several parts of in our presentation. The part I will not, however, repeat the part about the economy, which we already have discussed earlier. First, so I'd like to start with the topic of fiscal discipline. The government has all along adopted a prudent fiscal policies. According to the basic law, there are three principles. First of all, we need to spend according to the amount of revenue, and we need to balance the expenditure and the revenue, and also government expenditure should parallel economic growth, and also maintaining the confidence of international investors are also very important. So how have we performed since the handover? Let's first of all talk about the situation as whether or not we've kept expenditure within the limit of revenue. The pink bar is our expenditure. The lower part is the government expenditure. The taller one is the public expenditure. one can see that the government revenue had stayed at about 18.6%, same for government expenditure, but the trend is on the rise in recent years. If we were to increase government expenditure, then government revenue also need to go up correspondingly by way of tax increases or borrowing. The second requirement of the Basic Law is that we should balance the budget and avoid a budget deficit. Since 1997, we have encountered 11 years of budget surpluses and 5 years of deficit. During those 5 years, we use reserves equivalent to 13 months of government's reserves. The third requirement of the Basic Law is the government revenue must grow in line with GDP. And in this chart, the red curve is the cumulative GDP growth. You can see that since the reunification until our budget for 2013-2014, nominal GDP was up 56.7%. Whereas government revenue, the curve, the orange curve represents government revenue. You can see that our revenue has been going up and down, but overall speaking, for the budget of 2003 and 2004, I think it was up 54%. It's very close to the rate of GDP growth. The green line is our overall expenditure. That is the total government expenditure, and you can see that since the reunification, government expenditure has gone up by 126.4%. If we don't just look at the overall expenditure and just look at the recurring expenditure, then please refer to the blue curve, and you see that by the time of the 2013-2014 budget, it has gone up by 95%. So we can see that containing the growth of government expenditure is really necessary. Next, I'd like to tell members about the situation regarding government total expenditure. You find that since the reunification in 1997-1998, total government expenditure has gone up by 126%. So in this chart, you'll find that the recurring expenditure was up 95% over the last since the reunification. Economic growth was 56.7%. The green bar represents the capital works expenditure. Again, it has gone up substantially in recent years. Overall speaking, the growth was 172.4%. Other expenditures, including the one-off relief measures. For example, for 2013-2014, the green bar includes, tariff for electricity tariff, double CSS payment, waiving the rents for PRH tenants, and also injecting $12 billion in the carrying fund expenditure and allocation for the injection fund for the Vocational Training Council. So if we look at the distribution of expenditure according to different policy bureaus, you'll find that expenditure on education, welfare, and health has gone up drastically. For education, expenditure has gone up by 68.7% over the last 16 years. For welfare, it has gone up by 179%. Expenditure on health has been up by 87%. So to refresh members' memory, why do we have this big increase in expenditure in education? This is because over the years we've introduced new measures. For example, 0809 we have free senior secondary education, and we also have the 334 new curriculum and small class teaching. And after 2011, we have also steadily increased the number of university places. For welfare, Starting from 2013-2014, we have introduced the old age living allowance, and for expenditure on public health, we again have allocated more resources to the hospital authority.
For the recurrent expenditure for 2013-14, look at the largest chunk, pink, education. And then for the taking the three major sectors into account, they account for about 60% of the total recurrent expenditure. That is education, social welfare, and health. Now, in the past, you were worried as to whether a lot of the expenditure went to personal emolument. We looked at the case in the past 10 years, and we could see that for the salary of the civil servants and those in the subvented organizations, in fact, instead of 65%, it has come down to about 50%. For the expenditure side, we have to look at the capital works investment. Since the handover, for the first 10 years, basically, the yearly cash flow was about $29 billion. In the past 5 or 6 years, it has gone up drastically. For 2012 to 13, it is $62 billion. For 13-14, it's about $70 billion. For the coming years, a lot of projects will enter their construction peak, and therefore, in the next few years' time, we would be reaching $80 billion or even more. For expenditure on projects, please note that even for projects already approved by the Finance Committee, the total commitment will not have been funded from the outset. Now, from this one, you can see that for Cat A projects already approved by the FC, there are about 700 of them. They are at different stages of progress. If we look at the money committed, in fact, we have still got unfunded commitment, and there is a total of $398 billion. So projects are under construction. We need to reserve money to spend on such projects. Now I come to the revenue side. Since 1997-98, we have seen a growth of the total revenue to the tune of 54.7%. For the orange part, we see the operating revenue. For the blue part, the capital revenue. Profits tax has been our largest operating revenue. But you can also see that it can go up, it can also come down, and it fluctuates quite a lot. In the year 1999 to 2000, it was $37 billion plus, but then it could also peak at a level of over $100 billion. For salaries tax, it has been our second or third largest operating revenue. When compared with profits tax, it is more stable, but it can still vary from $24.8 billion to a peak of $51.8 billion. Stamp duties. Stamp duties varied from $7.5 billion to $51.5 billion. Investment return. In the past, we said that it could fluctuate a lot, but then since year 2007, we introduced a new arrangement. We had this agreement agreed with the exchange fund. So for the rate of investment return, it is based on the average of the past 6 years. For we are going to exceed $36 billion. So on average, the rate of investment return is 5%. And the land premium for capital revenue. So please look at the blue part. Again, it can be a very small amount like 5.4 billion, but it can also peak at a level of 84.6 billion dollars. So the volatility of our revenue income poses challenges to our management of public finances. Now I'm trying to show you from another angle. That is for the blue part, the revenue, total revenue, and the red line shows the percentage taken up by the total revenue vis-a-vis GDP. Again, you see that it fluctuates. For 2013-14, for our revenue estimates, for profits tax, we estimate that there will be an amount of $131 billion. Salaries tax, $51 billion. For other operating revenue, betting duty rates, first registration of vehicles, and other fees and charges. For the blue part, the largest chunk taken up by land premium, $69 billion being forecast. When it comes to revenue, we always say that the tax base for salaries tax and profits tax is narrow. How narrow is it? You can see from this analysis. For the year 2011-2012, take this year of assessment. We picked this year because we can see that as a result of the tax allowance, which wasn't raised in that year, we could see that 3.6 million people were working. But for those who paid tax, there were about 45% of them. In other words, in fact, 55% of those in the working population did not have to pay tax. For the taxpayers, let's take a look of the distribution. The top line shows the taxpayers paying the largest amount of salaries tax, and they account for that percentage shown in yellow. So for the first three bars, that is for those who pay the most of the salaries tax, they in fact contributed over 80% of the revenue from salaries tax. Perhaps we can also look at the case of total profits tax yield. Then it is also clear as to why we say that the tax base is quite narrow. Please note the year of assessment in 2011-12. For corporations, only 11% of them have to pay profits tax. In other words, 94,000 corporations were required to pay profits tax. Distribution, again, for the top 800 taxpaying corporations, in other words, less than 1% of the taxpaying corporations shoulder over 60% of our profits tax. So less than 1% of the taxpaying corporations contribute over 60% of the profits tax. After revenue, I would like to talk about fiscal reserves. Fiscal reserves show the total of the balances. What I want to bring out is that in fact, most of the funds have been earmarked for specific purposes. Now, as at the end of March 2013, we have this balance, and then we have about $700 billion by way of fiscal reserves. When we talk about the $400 billion, we are talking about the general revenue account surplus. Other than this balance, the rest is in the special purpose funds, like the Capital Works Reserve Fund. The balance is $77 billion. For this balance, well, in fact, this balance is not adequate to pay for all the unfunded projects, and yet they will be required in the coming years to the tune of a few $100 billion. And then Capital Investment Fund, Civil Service Pension Reserve Fund, the Disaster Reserve Relief Fund, etc. All of them have been set up for specific purposes, and therefore their balance cannot be transferred to other accounts to meet the day-to-day operation of the government. Now, for the various functions of the fiscal reserves, perhaps we should go over them once again. It can strengthen the Hong Kong dollar stability. End of March 2013, the fiscal reserves account for about a quarter of the exchange fund's total assets. And then, when there is an economic downturn, the fiscal reserves also provide a very important cushion. In fact, you read the lower part of it earlier on. It talks about the amount of fiscal reserves and how much government expenditure it can meet. In fact, it is sort of over 10 months of government's expenditure. We have to use our fiscal reserves every day so as to meet our day-to-day operation. Now, in the year 2012-2013, we see that how much we receive in terms of tax revenue. In fact, it was mostly concentrated in December and January. So look at the pink pillars. They are higher than our expenditure columns, but then it means that in most other months the expenditure exceeds our revenue. In other words, we have to rely on the fiscal reserves to meet our cash flow needs. And then our fiscal reserves can also generate substantial investment income. As I have pointed out, the majority of our fiscal reserves are deposited with the exchange fund to generate investment return. When the fiscal reserves dwindles, then the investment income will also fall. For our fiscal reserves, we need to meet the unfunded commitments as well as our liabilities. I want to say that we have got outstanding commitments on capital works measuring $398 billion, and then we have got debts guaranteed by the government, and they total $80 billion. And for the unfunded statutory pension liabilities, as at the end of March, the present value is $641 billion.
So, is that a lot, or too little compared with the $700 billion we have to consider the unfunded commitments? Regarding the challenges in the future, especially the challenge of population aging, I think we've already shown this chart in the budget for last year. The proportion of people over the age of 65 at the moment is about 14%. However, 30 years from now, 1 in 3 persons would be as senior citizens. And this will, as far as the public finance for Hong Kong is concerned, we have to consider how this would affect the income. The economic growth rate may slow down, the saving ratio may also go down, and we may need to spend more on health and welfare. So whether or not, so it will have profound implications for the sustainability of government's revenue and public expenditure. Okay, we'll now come to the last chart. That is, the economies around the world are now trending towards fiscal consolidation. That's the overall trend. Having considered the challenges ahead, the FS in drafting the budget for next year will need to be cautious and careful. and prudent. 8 members already indicated they would like to speak, and I'll read out the names. Chen Kam Lam, Wong Kok Hing, James Tin, Fernando Cheung, Yip Kin Yuen, Albert Ho, Sin Jung Kai, Ng Leung Sing. I propose that each member have 3 minutes. Mr. Chen Kam Lam, thank you. I think the last statement made by the Permanent Secretary, that is the trend towards fiscal consolidation, that I like to talk about. The FS always insists that we need to spend within our means, but over the last 10 odd years, our economic growth, our government revenue and expenditure, I think there's a lot of discrepancies here. Our revenue more or less would move up and down with our rate of economic growth, but government expenditure has gone up by 126.4%. So this shows that you've not complied with the principle under the basic law that you should spend within your means. What I'm most concerned about is that while we say that we have prudent fiscal management, but we're not able to really do that. Another thing is that only 12% of the population pay 80% of the total amount of taxes, and this is not a very desirable situation. So what I'd like to know is how the government can better control this expenditure while at the same time ensuring that we'll be able to spend within our means and balance our budget. FS, thank you. Controlling public expenditure is the duty of any government and the problem they have to face. On the one hand, social aspirations are going up all the time, and we have to satisfy such demands. At the same time, we need to help those who are underprivileged and needs to be helped. At the same time, we have to see whether we can increase our revenue. Mr. Chen pointed out that our tax base indeed is rather narrow. As the Permanent Secretary told you, profits tax, I think less than 1% of the companies paying tax are already paying 60% of our profit tax. And this, indeed, the tax base here is rather narrow. And perhaps we should explore ways as to how we can widen our tax base. I think members will probably recall that a few years ago we had a discussion on this issue, and there were a very extensive consultation. However, the conclusion at the time was that while we need to expand the tax base, but how we should go about doing it, we did not arrive at a consensus. We may need to explore this issue further. Mr. Wong Kok Hing. In Chart 2829, the government talked about the impact on public finance, the population aging, how did it affect the public finance, and also the burden posed by population aging will mean that our burden will become bigger and bigger. So here I have 2 questions. First of all, the MPF. The amount of saving accumulated is becoming bigger and bigger because the scheme is running for 10 years. So I'd like to ask whether or not the contributions by employer and employees, whether or not they could be entrusted with the foreign exchange fund for investment. So on the one hand, we can cut down on the administrative fees charged by the fund managers, while at the same time we have the confidence. If you look at the reserve fund for the pensions of civil servants, I mean, people have confidence in civil servants. So I wonder whether or not we can ask the government to make the investment for the MPF funds. Secondly, I note that the MPFA had recently carried out some reform measures, and they are now considering to set up some core funds. We've met with the MPFA recently. While the so-called core funds are good, but I think it would be even better if the government were to make the investments. And for the hedging with severance pay and long service payment, as our population ages, if you, of course, all employees would like you to scrap that requirement, but would the government consider implementing in stages the scrapping of that setting off or hedging arrangement? I've asked the administration this question, and the two departments involved, the Labour and Welfare Bureau, will pass the buck on to the Secretary for the Treasury, and the letter again passed the buck back to the Labour and Welfare Bureau, saying that there's a need for consensus among the Labour management. So now that the FS is here, I'd like to put this question to you. Two questions. To answer the first question, for the MPF, we're talking about millions of accounts, and it requires a lot of administrative work. So we can look at the fees from two angles. First of all, the administrative expenses, and secondly, the cost of investment. The latter is smaller. The administrative expenses are much bigger. So, entrusting this to the HKMA to do it would not work, because the deposits made to the MPFA come from single organizations. It's not done at the retail level. And all these deposits are rather substantial, and also the maturity period is rather long. So we therefore need to look at the two separately. The MPFA is now considering the setting up of a core fund, and this might be a good option to provide an alternative channel or option or choice for the public. Regarding the setting off arrangement, I understand this is not a technical problem, but rather involve the interests of Labour and management. And I don't think any single party can make the decision. We need the two sides to really have a detailed discussion. Once there is a consensus, we can certainly implement that. But before a consensus is arrived at, we need to have a detailed discussion. I don't know whether or not the Secretary would also like to supplement. Ms. James Teen, Madam Chair, other than members of the FA panel and other members have been invited to attend, and only 16 have turned up. I don't know whether or not whether the government has done an excellent job and we don't need to ask many questions, or members think that it's a waste of time to attend. The basic law asks you to spend within the means. It doesn't ask you to accumulate so much reserves, and so I'm willing to spend. And the business sector is saying that they've been set up. Many members talk about the poverty gap, and it's such a lot of unfairness. For those of us who do business, we want to take care of the underprivileged, and if the government fails to do that, the business sector is being criticized. Let's go to page 21 first of all, and here you're talking about whether or not the profit tax, the base for the profit tax is rather narrow. Chairman, I'm honored that my company fall within the top 1,000. I pay tens of millions of dollars in taxes. And at the bottom, you have many shelf companies. I'm sure KPMG, deal with many of these companies, and they would come under the category of 700,000 companies which are not paying taxes. So I don't really think that the tax base is so narrow. You have several 100,000 companies paying taxes, small companies. Many of them fall under the category of those who pay a lot of taxes. And secondly, I'd like to go to chart 19. A big item here would be the investment income, the $29 billion. if you look at the $80 to $100 billion of profit by the foreign exchange fund, and if you don't just look at the 80 million, then I think overall revenue is much bigger. And thirdly, I'd like to go to page 17. Other than 2002, 2003, when we were suffering from financial difficulties, please go to chart 17. You can see that since the year 2007, all the non-recurrent income, the land premium, has more or less become recurrent revenue for the government. I think the recurrent revenue is very stable. I don't think the government is always complaining it doesn't have enough money to spend. What I'm saying is that you are holding on 3,000 billion and they say they only have 700 billion. And they say that you have 3,000 billion, there are about 1,000 which are liabilities. So I don't think you, for the $600 billion, you do not charge them into the account all at once. So my conclusion is that the government is being the Scrooge. Why don't you spend more money to help the underprivileged? And I don't think I need a response from the administration. FS, would you like to also give a short response? I don't have a short response. Dr. Fernando Zhao, or Ms. Ip Kin Yun. Madam Chair, last year when we discussed the budget, I think we all remember that at the council meeting, almost all members spoke on the topic of education because education was an area where the administration was being criticized. There are two issues here. First of all, the growth in expenditure for education is really very small. If you go to page 13, you'll find that compared with other areas of expenditure, the growth in expenditure for education is relatively small. And this increase, I think we should all remember that in the days of Mr. Tung Chee-hwa, the growth in the expenditure education was very, very fast, but now it's slowing down. And secondly, I'd like the FS to also note that the second criticism is that you are all preparing the budget behind closed doors. Last year there was a scholarship for the outstanding, students, but that scheme has yet to be, tabled to this council. So I don't know whether or not it will really be implemented. So two questions I'd like to ask. First of all, amongst members, there are suggestions, various suggestions regarding education. But, well, of course, the bureaus have their own ideas and plans, but if members were to make suggestions which is about the growth in the recurrent expenditure, will you consider that in preparing the budget? The growth in expenditure, when members make such a suggestion, would you only consider, accepting the suggestion if we don't involve one-off expenditure? And secondly, in the current consultation, how can you avoid the situation as what happened last year? That is, you are doing it all behind closed doors. Would you consult the trade? Would you consult the representatives of the educational sector, for example, when it comes to the area of education? Mr. FS. Regarding government expenditure, our overall expenditure, to answer Mr. Teen's question, is that starting from 2007, when I became the FS, our expenditure has more than doubled.
I think you seldom find another place in which the expenditure would grow at such a rapid pace. So I'm a little bit worried here. That is, the growth of our expenditure is so rapid, and I want to know whether we can have sufficient revenue. And then for education, since 1997, there's been an increase of 70%, and it's still accounting for the largest amount of expenditure by category, measuring $60 billion. In recent years, for welfare, among others, may have also seen a rapid increase. And then for health, you understand that during the last term of the government, the share was increased from 15% to 17%. The 2% increase is also substantial. As a result of the exceptionally rapid increase, you may get the impression that education is not seeing a very rapid growth, but in fact it was a 4% year-on-year increase. So the absolute amount is not unsubstantial. What about proposing initiatives that are not relevant? Can you consult the relevant sector? Well, every year we have a consultation exercise. We do consult the stakeholders before we come up with the proposals. So perhaps members may not agree with specific proposals, but then the proposals were sort of gathered during the consultation exercise. If members have got any views, please make an appointment with the FS or you can write to them. Mr. Fernando Zhang, not here. Albert Ho, not here. Then Sin Chung Kai. I agree with each and every slide in your presentation on its own, but I can't take them together. For slide 11, the government revenue has grown in line with the GDP, but government expenditure has surpassed GDP growth. It seems alarming, but then if you look at the fiscal reserves, it is still 23 months of our government expenditure. It has increased, but it has not decreased, so it is out of step. You say that we have a crisis, the population is aging. I agree, but I don't see anything being done by you. In the past, there was a former EXCO member talking about golden 50 years. He proposed having more hospitals to be built, but you're not going to build another one. Yes, I agree with your analysis that the population is aging, but how are you going to use our fiscal reserves to solve our problems in the future? It seems that you are not seeking any solutions. In the past 6 years, when you were the FS, so far you have handed out $200 billion. You're going to have another surplus of $35 billion, so you will be handing out cash again. What are you going to do to ease the burden of the elderly? We will soon become elderly. So I just fail to see how you're making good use of your fiscal reserves to address the problem of an aging population. You identified the problem, but you're not providing any solutions. FS. Just now, Mr. Sin Chung Kai said that he would agree with me on each and every slide on its own, but he could not agree with the aggregate picture. I think it is quite unlikely to have this conclusion, improbable. We are getting 4 hospitals which are undergoing expansion or redevelopment. No, 2 of them were being redeveloped. Mr. Sin, let Mr. Zhang finish first. We have Kwong Wah, Queen Mary being redeveloped or expanded. It requires a lot of money. I hope you would appreciate that. As far as fiscal work is concerned, we need to provide the fiscal support. We hope that the revenue can meet our expenditure. Whenever we incur an expenditure, we have to see whether there is a policy consensus and whether we have got the operational details. When they are ready with that, we will certainly provide the support in terms of our fiscal arrangements or public finance management. Well, we haven't sort of the experience of not supporting policies which are ready with operation details. Next, Mr. Ng Leung Sing. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we have to be clear about how much we can use. It's $700 billion instead of $2,000 to $3,000 billion. If we are not clear about that, then there will be questions as to whether we are being fair in spending the money. First of all, I want to go to slide number 15. That's about capital works. Now the capital works investment is reaching an all-time high. I hope you will make preparations for such. You need to be more even, or otherwise we are having variations, we are having extreme fluctuations. Either you have too much or you don't have enough, so it won't benefit the grassroots workers. When grassroots workers would like to have jobs, they don't have one, and then they have an uneven income. Now we have got a manpower shortage, so the cost is escalating. But they may have become more senior of age, they may have already withdrawn from the labor market, and they cannot benefit. So in future, in your budgets, you have to be more forward-looking, so that the expenditure will be more evenly spread out, so that the grassroots can benefit from your expenditure to improve their living. So that's my concern about slide number 15. And then slide 27. This is what concerns us most. $398 billion for outstanding commitments on capital works. And then you have the unfunded pension liabilities. I think you need to be clearer in your presentation. When you talk about unfunded, just now you talked about $20 billion. That's for the current year. For unfunded, you have $600 billion. First of all, public service. Now, they serve a long time and they have this pension entitlement. So for 20, 30 years, they have been serving the government. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we started to be served by this public servant. Later on, we have to pay pension to the civil servants. Now, you say that it is unfunded, but then people in the past, citizens in the past, enjoyed their service. So those taxpayers should have funded the pension liabilities. Otherwise, later generations will be made to shoulder the liability. Would it be fair? If it is unfunded, it means that future taxpayers will find it difficult to afford. So you need to make an assessment as to whether this is affordable. Otherwise, it will create a problem. So for the pension liabilities, I want to know whether you want to sort of have it partially funded and have a fund ready for that. Mr. Wong referred to the Occupy Central campaign. So what about the political risk? What about the likelihood of a riot? Have you prepared for that? And then for the financial challenges, in the past we had over $100 billion to buy stocks. It was an actual experience that we still remember. Would you have an assessment to see if we need to repeat the defense against these regulators again? FS. There are a few questions here. First of all, capital works projects. The most ideal arrangement is to have them evenly spread out and incur the same amount of expenditure every year. But then it will be very difficult, especially when you have projects that are of a larger scale and take longer time, while projects smaller of scale will take less time. What we want to do is to have better integration with the mainland, and therefore we have a number of mega projects underway. What we want to achieve is to spread the expenditure as much as possible. In the past, it was $29 billion. Nowadays, it's $70 billion. We don't want to repeat the same. But of course, we know that the expenditure levels will still at a high level for a few years to come. And then the pension liabilities. Well, many civil servants serve for 30, 40 years. They are entitled to a pension. So we only have to pay the pension when they do retire. If it is no longer unfunded, that means we have to pay the pension immediately. This may create a problem. In the year 2000, we already changed the picture, and for civil servants recruited after year 2000, they are entitled to MPF rather than a pension. I think that's more or less the time for this question. Next, Mr. Lam Tai Fai. Thank you, Madam Chair. FS, time and again, the Education Bureau Chief has said that he will introduce a good policy that is 15 years free education. In other words, free kindergarten education as well. I had talked to Mr. Ng, and it takes time and money to have 15 years free education. Has he talked to you? Has the Secretary for Education talked to you? If not, we are only having castles in the air. And then, as a result of the population aging, we will have a lot of pressure on all fronts, including economic pressure. For the one-way permit scheme, we don't have to say. The decision is made by the central authority. The central authority is also worried it will certainly help us to ease the problem of an aging population. Our government has always emphasized the problem of an aging population, but you haven't really proposed any solutions. So is it possible for the one-way permit holders to be subject to an age limit? If the person allowed to come is age 65 or above, it will only add to our burden, right? And then for the stamp duties and land premium, all along they have constituted the largest part of our revenue. With the draconian measures, there are fewer transactions, and so we haven't got revenue from stamp duty. And you have no timetable for the scrapping of the legislation. So do you expect a drastic fall in the revenue coming from stamp duties? FS, I agree that for kindergarten education, it is the most important element in our educational system. This is my personal understanding. I think that it is very important. Now, I understand that Mr. Eddie Ng, the Secretary for Education, is studying the matter of providing 15 years free education. Mr. Moses Chang has been invited to chair a working group to look at free kindergarten education. I think when Mr. Ng, the Secretary, has come up with a policy proposal with operational details, he will certainly talk to me in great details about the expenditure to be incurred. So in other words, it hasn't been discussed. Not yet? No, not yet, because he hasn't got the policy, hasn't got the implementation details. Once he's ready with that, he will certainly talk to me about that.
Regarding the single permit issue, perhaps I can, pass this on to the Security Bureau, so it's not within your purview. Stamp duties, that is not the biggest source of our revenue. The biggest source of revenue is profits tax. Stamp duties account for only $40 billion. It's not the biggest source of our revenue. But anyway, we are concerned about the fluctuation in stamp duty revenues. I mean, that would depend on the performance of the market. If the market doesn't perform well, our stamp duty will certainly also drop. Fernando Zhang. Today we have given lots of figures. The Permanent Secretary just told us that as our economy grew, government expenditure increased even further. As far as tax revenue was concerned, we have a narrow tax base, and it would appear that we're going to face lots of challenges going ahead. While we have a very large reserve, more than 300 billion, but there are lots of challenges ahead. So it would be better if we could, save more money now. While at the same time, over the last more than 10 odd years, the quality of the living standard of many people have actually dropped. For senior citizens who want to, seek medical, help, if they want to make bookings with the OPD, they have to wait for a long time. If they go to the A&E ward, they have to wait for hours. For those who are handicapped, waiting for admission to homes, they have to wait for more than 10 years. And same for senior citizens. I mean, thousands of people, several thousand people die while they're on the waiting list for old age homes. According to your figures, and according to, there are many poor people. We have a serious poverty problem here. The Poverty Commission told us that 1/5 of our households are poor. Even with the cash transfer payments, there's still a large number of people who are poor. So with a serious poverty problem, and then when we look at public services, be it public health, education, welfare, housing, you always have long waiting queues for children with SENs. After they have gone through the assessment, again they have to wait. Very often, the prime period when they are from 0 to 6 years old have elapsed and they still don't get the service. The FS, is the controller of public finance. You determine how resources are allocated. So over the years, or for the next year, let's say, what are your plans as to how you can rectify these problems? Or will you continue and sit there and wait for the different bureaus? As Mr. Lam Tai Fai said, you hope that the Secretary of Education will talk to you. But if they don't, if the different bureaus simply don't do anything, then the public will continue to suffer. Would you change your mode of operation? Are you turning a blind eye to all the sorts of problems I pointed out to you just now? Well, we understand the difficulties faced by the low-income households in Hong Kong. In fact, we have different bureaus responsible for different policies. We will try our best to work with them in terms of the financial support. Our total expenditure has more than doubled since 2007 and 1997. Expenditure on medical health went up by 88%. Welfare was up by 180%. CSSA had more than doubled since 1997. Again, there's 70% increase in expenditure for education. So these are rather substantial increases since 1997. That is for those who, for the needy people, we have actively launched measures to help them. However, such growth in expenditure will need to be dealt with carefully because we need to think of the long term, because such increases involve recurrent expenditure. So we have to look at the overall the sustainability of our public finance, so that we will not end up in a situation where our revenue cannot pay for our expenditure, and as a result, the whole community will suffer. Mr. Albert Ho? Yeah. Now that you've come back, would you like to put your question? Yes. Having read the PowerPoints presented by the government, in terms of fiscal discipline, I can only say that you are over-prudent and you're not being progressive enough. You are excessively prudent because for many years you've overestimated your expenditure and underestimated your revenue, and the reserves is no small amount. We're talking about thousands of billions of hundreds of billions of reserve, and on the same time you don't have any long-term plans. And it's not just the fault of the current administration. Since the SARS epidemic, the whole government, the whole administration has become very wary of long-term commitments, so that we have imbalance in terms of land planning. Planning for welfare is absent. Old people now have to wait for many years for homes for place in the homes of the elderly. Very many would die before they get a place, and there is also a shortage of columbaria. So what are we going to do? Obviously, there are solutions which cannot be fixed in the short term, but at least you should be willing to spend money and adopt a more drastic approach, and I'm sure some improvements could be made. Despite my criticism, however, I must say that this year there is one area which I'd like to commend the administration. That is, you are providing a subsidy for the low-income earners. We've appealed for this for many years. Now that you are willing to give this subsidy for the low-income earners, I believe this can certainly help the working poor. And we will work hard with the government to come up with a good arrangement. Now, my question for the FS is that you don't have a plan at the moment, but how hard will you work to do this? When I answer Dr. Fernando Zhang's question, I already said that if you look at our past expenditures, you would agree that we have been progressive. Some people even criticize us for being too progressive. If you understand the whole approach in public administration, for example, since I became the FS, our expenditure is more than double. I said that for health, health was increased by 90%, welfare 180%, education 70%. All these are substantial growth in expenses, and it shows that the government is responding proactively to the needs of the people. But we must be careful to distinguish between one of expenditure and recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure would need to be supported by recurrent revenue. So we'll certainly be cautious, while at the same time we'll try our best to help those in need. Finally, it's my turn. I think I agree with Mr. Shin Chung Kai. This year, I think when the FS come to consult us on the budget for next year, I think you are giving us more information than in previous years. You've also explained the rationale, your rationale in managing public finance, and I agree with many of the things you said in the slides. If one look at government expenditure, you may think that the government has already been very proactive. But if you look at the size of the reserve, the public can't help saying that since you have such a large reserve, why is it that so many policies that people are looking forward to have not yet been implemented? So even though in a slide you told us about how the reserves are to be used, but I think the basic problem is that the public don't understand why you have built up such a lot of reserves, but yet they don't know how you intend to use it. And there's several needs, cope with inflicted needs, and coping with the problem of our aging population. Now, if our finances remain sound, then I'm sure the unfunded commitments can still be paid for, over every year. So are you planning to reserve a large amount of money to cope with the problem of population aging, or are you going to make other investments? For the expenditure on capital works, according to the information, your information has gone up a lot. But I don't know whether you've done this analysis. Despite the increase in capital works, the public is having the feeling that many of the projects have yet to start since you've scrapped the urban council. Although the allocation for these capital works have gone up a lot, and the cost has gone up as well for such capital works. say, compared with the period before the unification, I think the cost of building a school before the unification and now, by how much is the cost gone up? So the increase in expenditure, how much of it is due to the increase in the number of projects, and I also don't want the large projects to be given priority so that the smaller projects will be put on hold. Thank you. We need to look at our reserve level carefully. It's only a lump sum, and once it is used, it will be spent. It's not like our recurring revenue. But in the long term, we need to deal with the cope with recurring expenditure. That is, once we make a policy decision now, the recurring expenditure will be with us forever. Like you said, perhaps we need to explain more to the public before they understand. As for the capital works, many of our works now are mega projects, but we've also reserved substantial amount to implement the work related to the 10 major projects. For many of these projects, we've heard from people in the different districts that they don't want certain projects to be carried out in their district. So we tried our best to talk to the people in the different districts so that we can implement such capital works that will benefit the people in the community. If one look at chart 15, is the ratio 8:2 or 9:1? Or what? Well, members may be concerned as to whether or not the 10 mega projects will take up funds which otherwise would be available for the other capital works in the district. From 0809 to 2012-2013, we approved new capital works more than 400 million, and more than 200 billion are for for projects which fall outside the 10 mega projects. For the current financial year, we propose 44 projects totaling 68 billion, and 4 items about 70 billion have to do with the mega projects. So in other words, you are spending more on the capital works at the district level. Okay, so much for our discussion on this item, and I think we need to move on. So thank you, Mr. Secretary and your team. And the next item is the plan. It's the launching of the Islamic bonds.
Laura 會嚟。哦，冇錯，佢會再嚟。之前啊，佢應該會繼續工作嘅，據我了解，金發局。如果準備好嘅，請政。
When you're ready, please give us a briefing. Thank you, Madam Chair. Today, we would like to brief the panel on 2 items concerning the government bond program. The first one is that we would like to amend the loans ordinance so that we can enable the raising of funds by the government under the government bond program via the issuance of Islamic bonds. And then we would like to introduce relevant measures to enhance the liquidity of government bonds issued under the institutional part of the government bond program, GBP. I think you have some understanding about the GBP. It was first launched in 2009, and as a result, it was able to provide high-quality bonds issued by the public sector to the local bond market. So far, we have got $90 billion concerning the total outstanding government bonds. So the scale is being established. For the institutional part, it is about 60 billion Hong Kong dollars, like 2 years all the way up to 10 years bonds. We'll continue to launch the GBP so as to provide different sorts of bonds for the market, and we can broaden the investors' base, and we hope that we can enhance the liquidity of GBs transacted in the market. Today, we would like to brief you on one of our proposals. We would like to issue Islamic bonds under the GBP. A few months ago, that is in July 2013, the Stamp Duty Legislation Alternative Bond Schemes Amendment Ordinance 2013 was enacted by the LegCo, which provides a comparable taxation framework for Sukuk, that is Islamic bonds vis-a-vis conventional bonds. At the same time, we could see that all over the world, the total amount of Islamic bonds issued was worth 130 billion US dollars. We believe that we are well placed to issue Islamic bonds, and we can promote Islamic finance, and we hope that they can be listed in the Hong Kong Exchange. In the light of this, under the government bond program, we would like to respond to the prevailing market conditions and needs, and we hope that by working through the GBP, we can further promote Sukuks. We hope that under the GBP, we can issue Islamic bonds so that international capital market players understand that we have got the legislation, the regulatory work, as well as the taxation arrangements to support the issuance of Islamic bonds. In this way, we can promote the issuers to issue Islamic bonds in the market of Hong Kong. For the international capital markets, for highly rated Sukuks or Sukuks issued by governments, there is a shortage. And for the Hong Kong government, internationally speaking, we have got a very good credibility rating. So the institutional part of the GBs, it is already well established. And so we believe that, and we hope that by issuing the Sukuks, we can further arouse the interest of the international capital market players. We have also noted that in other countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Qatar, among others, and even the UK, have already or are contemplating to issue sovereign Sukuks. Against such a background, we examined our existing legislation. Yes, a few months ago, the legislature amended the inland revenue as well as the stamp duty ordinance. Under the GBP, if we are to issue Sukuk, we have to amend the loans ordinance at the same time. This is because of the special structures of Sukuk, and also the mode has to follow the Sharia. Therefore, we have special purpose vehicles being set up. And we are talking about transfer of assets. As a result of such requirements, the existing loans ordinance may not render support to the GBP issuing Sukuk. Therefore, we propose that for the loans ordinance, there should be a technical amendment so that the SPVs set up by the government to issue sukuk will be regarded as borrowing under the provisions of the loans ordinance. For the pending legislative proposal, we can leverage the newly added Schedule 17A to the Inland Revenue Ordinance to broaden the meaning of the word borrow and introduce the concept of specified alternative bond scheme in the loans ordinance. In this way, it can cover a situation when the government sets up a SPV to raise funds by way of sukuk issuance. We believe that the relevant legislative amendment won't be too complicated. This is because a few months ago we had the experience of amending the Inland Revenue, and the relevant concepts and definitions could be made use of. We take this opportunity to have two consequential amendments. First of all, Section 26A of the Inland Revenue Ordinance, as well as the Bond Fund Resolution. For Section 26A of the IRO, we want to allow coupon payments and disposal gains derived from any sukuk issued in connection with the GBP to enjoy the same full tax exemption as the currently applicable to the interest payments and disposal gains in relation to conventional GBs. For the second part, we need to pay out of the bond fund to settle the coupon payments and redemption payment to sukuk holders through the SPV, mirroring the current arrangement for the bond fund, and they are technical in nature. We are in the process of drafting the amendments. We hope that we can come back in the first quarter of 2014. This amendment will be the first step in our plan to issue Islamic bonds. The Hong Kong MA is the government's representative under the GBP. The Hong Kong MA is examining other practicality issues so that after the legislative exercise, we'll look at the prevailing market conditions and market needs, and then we will come up with a sukuk issuance plan. We take this opportunity to brief members briefly on certain measures to tie in with the market needs so as to enhance the liquidity of the institutional part of the GBP so that investors can be more flexible and take into account the market conditions to adjust the portfolios. The Hong Kong MA looked at the other issuing experience in other sovereignties, and we have also looked at the case of the market makers. We have talked to them, and we have also talked to other market participants. Two measures will be introduced, and you'll find them in paragraph 14. We have the switch tender in subparagraph A, as well as the bond swap facility in subparagraph B. And generally speaking, market players have been using such measures, that is by way of tender and by way of swap. They will make use of the shorter term GBs, and they will also look at the less popular GBs. They will be redeemed, and then they will sort of exchange. It's a matter of offsetting. In this way, we can tie in with the activities of the market makers, and then the investors can dispose of and can transact the institutional GBs in a more liquid manner. Madam Chair, for such activities like switch tender facility and swap facility, under the GBP, we will be reflecting them accurately in the accounts as well as the estimates. Making use of these two liquidity measures will have switches and swaps, and they will involve bonds already issued. And we are talking about offsetting bonds which have been redeemed. So for any one time, the total outstanding amount will be maintained at more or less the same level, and it will not exceed the amount approved by the Legislative Council. And just take this opportunity to report to members about the two measures. On this note, I end my briefing. Together with the colleagues from the Hong Kong MA, we'll be happy to take questions from members. All right, thank you. 4 members would like to ask questions, 3 minutes each. Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Madam Chair, I asked a similar question. Last time it was raised from 100 to 200 billion dollars as far as the ceiling was concerned. Now the GBP has 2 parts. First, we have the I-bonds. Second, we have the outstanding loans. For the P&L, for you to run the GBP, how much have you gained by way of profits, or how much have you lost? Before you give me the answers, myself or at least my party would find it difficult to give you approval, because it will be difficult for us to tell what will happen when you issue the sukuk. You're simply talking about legislative amendments. What about the P&L? And what about the expected profit or loss? If we are to incur a loss, is it a proper use of public money? You haven't got any forecast. You're simply talking about legislative proposals. Are we talking about black hole? How big is it? And do you have a plan to issue the sukuk? I just cannot be convinced. Who would like to take up the questions? Allow me to try, Madam Chair. I remember that previously we did supply information. Perhaps let me say this again. In the past few years, under the GBP, if we only look at now for the bonds that have been issued, we collect the money and the money is handed over to the exchange fund, and we pay the same fees and we get the same investment income as the fiscal reserves. And then if you take away the interest rate as well as the administrative fees, we still have a net balance in the positive. For the year 2010 to 2011, the net return was about $700 million. So it is in the black. I think just now Mr. Sin also asked a question for the Wednesday sitting about the rate of return. We're going to give a reply. For the net, we have a positive balance, so it isn't constituting a financial burden. What about the sukuk issuance? What about the scale? For I-bonds, mainly speaking, you hope that you will attract the retail investors. For sukuk, are you targeting at the institutional investors or the retail investors? For the people in Hong Kong, probably the easiest way is to buy I-bonds. Could I to tackle this question? The current thinking is that we are going to target mainly at the institutional investors. This is because for Islamic bonds, generally speaking, the structure is more complicated. In other places, Islamic bonds like this are also mainly targeted at the institutional investors. Allow me to say this again. The purpose of doing this on this occasion is to let the international investors and the institutional investors in the international market understand that we provide a good platform and we are able to do it. And that was shown in the earlier legislative amendment exercise. And we want to introduce this one to tie in with that. After the legislative exercise, we have to talk to the market players to see what can be done to achieve our purpose. Mr. Wong Kwok Hing.
Madam Chair, I have 2 questions. First of all, according to Islamic laws, they are not the same as our local laws. So, should there be any disputes, have you considered how such disputes are going to be resolved? For example, under Islamic law, usury is not allowed, and so So how are you going to deal with this problem when you issue these Islamic bonds? And secondly, earlier, many years ago, when the administration responded to questions by members in this council, said that you would actively prepare the required talent for the scheme. So if you're going to issue Islamic bonds, in terms of the expertise, I mean, how ready are you at this stage? How prepared are you? So two questions, Madam Chair. Let me talk about the question of Islamic laws, and I'll ask my colleagues to answer the question about the training of talents. Regarding the issuance of Islamic bonds, there's a lot of experience in other jurisdictions and in the market. Although the Islamic bonds are governed by Islamic laws, that is, no interest will be allowed to be charged, and the proceeds from the listing are subject to some restrictions. However, the trading of Islamic bonds in international markets follow the standard practice. That is, one would deal with the relationship between the buyer and the seller according to the contract for the transaction. Mr. Wong made a very good point. That is, earlier, when we amended the Inland Revenue Ordinance and the Stamp Duty Ordinance, we did discuss the question. That is, when there are disputes arising from the difference between two legal systems, we will rely on the contract to ensure that the trading in these bonds are compatible with the requirements of Islamic law, while the parties to the transaction, if they need to go for arbitration, or if there are disputes relating to the contract, how should these disputes be resolved? Basically, we would follow what is stipulated in the documents stipulated governing the issuance of the bonds. For example, in Hong Kong, if we were to issue certain Islamic bonds, and in our issuance document, we will spell out clearly that we would choose, for example, the laws of Hong Kong as the basis for the resolution of any disputes. Regarding the question of talent, I think we are adopting a multi-pronged approach. On the one hand, through international conferences and seminars, over the past year, we've organized many such seminars. We have a Islamic Financial Services Board, which is an international body setting the rules governing Islamic bonds. We invited many people to attend those seminars so that they get exposure. Mr. Yip Kim, Mr. Cheung. Well, Islamic bonds is rather a very complex product. The requirements governing the transactions are different. We need to amend the Inland Revenue Ordinance and the Stamp Duty Ordinance to accommodate these bonds. We're making such a big effort, but how much will it mean that the Islamic bonds will make up a large percentage of the bonds issued by the government? What is the percentage? And secondly, the unique thing about Islamic bonds is that they have to rely on some commercial operations to earn a profit and pay back the profit to the investors. In that process, will certain risks be caused, and how would those risks be managed? If we're going to issue Islamic bonds, as our colleagues from the HKMA said, we need to wait for the enactment of the legislation, and then we'll look at the demand in the market and the market conditions before we decide on the amount to be issued. We don't have a fixed number in mind at the moment. Right now, the total amount of unredeemed bonds, it's about 90 billion. So at the start, when we issue a new type of product, we need to do it slowly, in order to attract the international investors, especially the interests of the international investors. So for the time being, it will not affect there will not be any major change in the composition of the bond portfolio. We will launch these products in the light of the circumstances and to tie in with the international demand. We don't want to issue bonds if nobody were interested in these bonds. So we need to look at the supply and demand and the circumstances in the market at the time before we make a decision. Mr. Nguyen Singh. Regarding the development of financial products, like other members, I am concerned that while we need to issue more of such products, we also need to do more in terms of investor education so that there won't be any risk. So according to the paper, by 2011, you have the scale of the bond issue is about 1,300 billion. We have 600 odd organizations which are engaged in Islamic financial products. So how many of these organizations have already been set up in Hong Kong, and would they register the business in Hong Kong and use Hong Kong as the base of the activities? And how many other jurisdictions are trading these Islamic bonds, the experience of which we can learn from? Well, in Hong Kong, we're only at the beginning stage when it comes to Islamic bonds. There are only 2 banks in Hong Kong which which have window dealing is Islamic financial products. We don't have. Well, there are some international banks which are monitoring the situation at the moment. Mr. Ng asked a good question as to which jurisdiction we can learn from. Malaysia actually has developed Islamic financial products very well in the last few years. Islamic bonds take up about 60 to 7% of the global supply of Islamic bonds. So we have close liaison with them, and tomorrow we're going to have an international convention concurrently held in Hong Kong and Malaysia, so that we can learn from the experiences how we in Hong Kong can promote Islamic financial products. Other than the Malaysian Central Bank, we've also invited more than 10 financial institutions to attend this conference. That is, after the legislation is enacted in July, now that we have a platform bill, we will explore how we can grasp this opportunity. Mr. James Toh. Madam Chair. Are there Islamic individuals in Hong Kong? If they're not allowed to buy bonds, say I-bonds, issued by our government, because we don't know whether or not it's regarded as, collecting an interest. Now that you're issuing Islamic bonds to institutional investors, for some ethnic minorities who are Muslims, in your issue, would you forbid bonds to be split up for reissue? I think the target clientele would be the institutional investors. Splitting them up for sale, I think the possibility of that is very slim. In Hong Kong, we have banks which provide Islamic banking service. If because of the teaching of the religion, for example, if they're not allowed to collect interest, so we can give them an option. So if they choose, well, we will not be able to give them all the investment tools, but I think there are certain stocks where if you invest in those stocks, it's not in breach of the Islamic doctrines. Of course, the bonds could be held by institutional investors, and the issuer. I think that the banks can issue those products again. Now, for the first round of bonds, you issue to the institutional investors, but are there provisions in the contract stopping them from splitting up those bonds for resale? Mr. Ho, thank you for the question. For Islamic bonds and traditional bonds, in the issuance document, there is no requirement which forbid the bondholder as to how they would deal with these bonds. For a typical institutional investor, after they made the investment, there are no restrictions as to how they can deal with those bonds. To follow up Mr. Sin's question, so the proceeds received from the issuance of Islamic bonds will go to the exchange fund. So, from the perspective of the Islamic bonds, do you expect that during the period of issuance and also the maturity period, do you project that basically you will be making a profit from the issuance of these bonds, or do you project that you'll be incurring a loss? But still, you do it because it's a new type of bonds. We don't know too much about the older type of bonds. I understand there are two parts. First of all, we have to consider how much the foreign exchange fund will help you, how much profit it will help you make. And on the other hand, you have to incur an expenditure here. Are you projecting that overall you'll be making a profit? Or is it that for these bonds, the possibility of making a loss is bigger? I mean, do you have any such analysis? Madam Chair, the issuance of Islamic bonds, although the structure is rather complex, but basically, compared with the ordinary bonds issued by the government, we are basically looking at the bond yield. For Islamic bonds, if we talk about the same issue, the same maturity, there's a slight difference in terms of the bond yield, a few basis points, but it's not very much different. If you ask me to project whether or not we make a profit or loss, that would be difficult for me to predict. I mean, likewise, we can't predict whether or not our return from the issuance of traditional bonds would be higher, because we're talking about two different types of products. So basically, when we issue Islamic bonds, the cost we need to incur would be more than those for traditional bonds. Is that right? I already gave members some figures. Over the last few years, for the ordinary bonds, we have been able to make a surplus. If you look at the past record, if the costs go up by a few basis points or 10 to 20 basis points, I don't think it will have a significant impact on our reserves. But it's difficult for me to project how much income we will collect from the foreign exchange fund. Mr. Abraham Shek. Mr. Nguyen Singh asked you a question. That is, in other jurisdictions which also issue Islamic bonds, what is the situation there? Other than Malaysia, there is also Singapore. Singapore is a Muslim country. Well, these bonds are so successful because they have the infrastructures in place. They are no ordinary bonds. It's closely linked to the Muslim religion if you look at it from the Sharia law. Singapore also had a very good infrastructure in place to accommodate the Islamic religion. So how can our infrastructure in Hong Kong compare with those in Malaysia? I agree that you should issue more different types of new products, but have you made an assessment as to how you can attract investors to come and what infrastructures you have in place? Islam is not like any other religion. It has its own unique characteristics. If the ethnic minorities in Hong Kong are not even given equal opportunities, so would there be an impact? Madam Secretary.
實 Thank you for this question. In terms of the support measures, we have already done a lot. In terms of the infrastructure, we have already got a good foundation to support different types of bonds and to allow different bond issuers to come to Hong Kong to be listed. In the previous years, we have done a lot of work, like working together with the Legislative Council to amend the IRO as well as the SDO so as to deal with the inconsistencies. In this way, we are able to remove the barriers forbidding the issuance of Islamic bonds in Hong Kong, and we are encouraging issuers from other countries to come here to issue Islamic bonds. We also believe that as far as market development is concerned, if we make use of the GBP, then we can be more successful in our promotional work. We can demonstrate to the market that we have got the infrastructure, we have got other transaction platforms to support the issuance of Islamic bonds so that the bonds can be transacted in Hong Kong, and then it will be a good support for non-Islamic countries, even like the UK. The UK has also announced that they are about to issue Islamic bonds. So not just Islamic countries, but other advanced economies are also considering such business opportunities, and they're also fighting for such activities. Don't cite the example of the UK. Islam is also a very sort of important religion other than Christianity in the UK. If you say this, it shows that you're ignorant. The UK may be able to do it, but Hong Kong may not. But we aren't just targeting at the local institutional investors, but international institutional investors may also be interested. Mr. Chair, I think many members raised a similar point at the Bills Committee meetings. Yes, I was at the Bills Committee meetings, but they were not able to answer this question. Yes, I appreciate we are in the pro-establishment camp, but it doesn't mean that we can let them rush through the amendment. Yes, you're entitled to your right to say no. Now, in the first quarter of 2014, the administration would like to introduce the relevant legislative proposals. Any objection from members? Well, for the questions asked, probably you need further explanation when we do hold meetings for the Bills Committee. Last item then, plan for 2016 population by census. Since this is a fiscal item, so all members of the LegCo have been invited to attend. So when the admin is ready, but first of all, let's invite them to join us. Have you prepared a PowerPoint presentation for us? So please be brief, and then members may ask questions. Please take a look at paper CB bracket 1 390/13 to 14 bracket 07. Well, once the admin is ready, please start your presentation.
其實係啦，應該要可以嘛？
得，而家睇緊，而家我有。
Are you ready? Yes. Please continue. Well, in fact, we did ask you, and if it is fine, then you could have provided it to us earlier so that we could have it projected onto the screen. Yes, you may now start. Now, for the 2016 population by census, we have already started our preparatory work. If I may start with a word about the background. Since 1961, for every 10 years, Hong Kong conducts a population census, and this is in line with the international practice, that is to have a population census in a decade's time. And then, in the middle of the intercensual period, we have a population by census. And the first one was conducted in 1966. And then 76, 86, 96, 06, we have had by census. In accordance with this practice, the next one is to be held in 2016. Whether it is a census or by census, we have the same aim. You may be clear about that, but let me be brief about the aim. This is to obtain up-to-date benchmark information on the socio-economic characteristics of the population and on its geographical distribution. For population census and population by census series, they are different from other household surveys in that it is of a sizable scale. And a result of the large scale, when compared with other surveys, the census or by census may provide statistics of high precision even for population subgroups and small geographical areas. As I have pointed out, the population census is conducted once every 10 years, and then between two censuses with the population by census, but they have the same aim. However, there are some slight changes in terms of the design. The latest census was held in 2011, so the coming by census will be held in 2016. The difference between the two of them is as follows. First of all, for the population census, we have a complete head count. We count all the households, and then we sample some households for detailed inquiry. So for the population census, we have got a long form as well as a short form, so as to get the basic information as well as the detailed information. For the by census to be held between two censuses, we only have a very large-scale sample survey instead of a complete head count. So we've got the long form only, rather than both the long form and the short form. And we use statistical methods to infer the overall characteristics. In terms of the accuracy, it may be not as strong as a census, but in terms of the content, there isn't much difference. As I have said, we are doing a sampling, and initially we would like to sample 1/10 of the population, or 1/10 of the households. This is the same as that for the detailed inquiry of the 2011 population census. We hope that the outcome will be comparable, and therefore we have followed the design used in the detailed inquiry of the 2011 census. For the means of data collection, in light of the IT progress, in light of the changes in the lifestyles of the households, and for the 11C, we have got good results from the self-enumeration. So we're going to have two phases. First of all, we have the self-enumeration. In other words, for those households who have been selected, they have the choice to submit an e-questionnaire via the internet. After the first phase, and for selected households, if they choose not to go through such a means, then in the second phase, we are going to conduct face-to-face interviews. So we're going to visit the households to interview persons therein one by one. I think you can sort of quicken up, because some members would like to ask questions. For what you have been telling us, in theory, we already know them. I want to highlight the main points. Yes, please. In terms of data collection, for face-to-face interviews, on this occasion, it will be a little bit different. We would like to have computer-assisted interviewing, CAI. So the enumerators will make use of mobile devices to record the collected data during interviews. In other words, it is a paperless mode. Of course, it is more environmentally friendly, and by using the computers, it means that the flow, as well as the administrative work and data collection, etc., will be conducted more efficiently. At the same time, we can verify the data instantly, so that enumerators may know that there are some data which require clarification on the spot, and this way we can enhance the data quality. And the the data collection period will be the same like the 11C. That is, it will last for a number of days, 34 days. As to the data topics, we have already conducted a consultation. We consulted policy bureaus, government departments, selected organizations and groups, etc. And in the course of it, we have been given a lot of valuable comments. The majority of the users are able to confirm that we have been selecting useful data topics. On top of that, they have also given us some suggestions. When we decided on the proposed topics, we took into account a number of factors, like whether the data is useful, whether the respondents are willing and able to answer. Will enumerators be able to understand? We are asking students to become the enumerators. In other words, they are not skillful statisticians. Of course, they will be given adequate training, but still we have to bear in mind as to how much they can acquire within a short period of time. As to the existence of other data source or data collection channel, processing efforts, comparability of data with previous censuses and by censuses, and whether the interview can be kept within a short time. The more we ask, that means the longer it takes to complete the interview. And this has to be considered as well. In addition, we need to take into account the international practices. Having considered all such factors, of course, other than data topics, we have to consider the classification or categorization, like sex. Maybe we have to look at the case of the transsexuals as well as the transgenders. And then for relationships, other than the conventional categories like registered marriages, cohabitation, and same-sex relationship will have to be accommodated. And on this occasion, in the light of the users' request, we'll consider whether they will also be added to the classifications. Having considered the factors that I've outlined and having analyzed the suggestions received for the 2016 by-census, we propose that there should be 41 topics, and they have been set out in the slide. For the details, you can find them at the back of our paper. The by-census is a large-scale and complicated statistical event. We therefore require computer systems and web applications to support our work. Therefore, we are in the process of conducting a feasibility study, which is expected to finish by late 2013 or early 2014. Initially speaking, we believe that we need computer equipment and services which will incur a non-recurrent cost of some $89 million over a 5-year period from 2014-15 to 2018-19. And of course, when the feasibility study is completed, the relevant details will be presented to the FC in 2014 for funding requests. On this note, I end my presentation. So 5 members would like to ask questions, 3 minutes each.
議員范國威、
汪國興、范國威、陳志全 and 薛浩。
Wong Kok-heng. Madam Chair, I have 2 questions. First of all, well, early this year, we learned about some frontline enumerators who were rigging the information collected. And after the scandal, I'd like to ask the director how in this by-census you can avoid such similar scandals from happening. And secondly, under the topics to be covered by the by-census, I think these are very general topics. But there are several issues on which I'd like to know whether you want to consider to collect information. First of all, subdivided flats. Early on, the Housing Department also, upon our request, engaged a consultant to collect information and then made a projection and told us that about 60,000 people live in subdivided flats. The Housing Department also admit that the projection is not accurate because they could not conduct a territory-wide survey. So are you prepared to also cover these subdivided flats in the by-census? And secondly, the physically handicapped. Again, the Labour and Welfare Bureau has told us that they are only relying on projections. We talk about the subsidy for the handicap or allowance for the handicap. They told us that if they were to issue this, it would involve 1 million people. The government have to spend $20 billion. There's no basis for the projection. So when you survey the different types of handicapped people, would you conduct such a survey? And thirdly, the children of parents who neither whom are Hong Kong residents, it will have serious impact on housing, education, welfare, and medical health. But these children don't reside in Hong Kong. So what are you going to do with them? How are you going to cover them in the by-census? Well, this question is the legacy of history. So it's a serious issue. Would you also look into this in your survey? Madam Chair, in a population census, how do we enhance the quality of the data we collect? In our experience, we certainly step up our efforts to enhance accuracy. All the enumerators are led by a team leader. will give them instructions. The leader will take samples of the data they have collected to see whether or not there are any inaccuracies. And in the more than 10-day period, the leaders will be guiding these enumerators. We also have checkers who would validate the data return as well. So there's mechanism to ensure that the data which come back are accurate. Next, I'd like to talk about the question related to handicapped persons. Here we're talking about special topics, and these are normally not be covered in a census or by census. In December 2008, we also have a report on the chronically ill and the handicapped. The Census and Statistics Department also completed this year a survey, and I believe there will be updated information regarding chronic patients and the handicapped next year. So these are come under a specified topic, and they cannot be covered in a census or by census, given its complexity. Regarding subdivided flats, again, expertise is required for someone to find out whether or not there are subdivided flats in the premises. The administration has asked the consultant to make a projection. The Housing Department, the CNS Department, the Rating Evaluation Department have all join in the effort to ensure that the information projection is accurate. Next year, we have plans to update the information. We invite tenders and engage another consultant to help us update the information. What about children born of parents who are not Hong Kong residents? Now that we have more such children born in Hong Kong, in 2007, we've already conducted polls or surveys in the Department of Registration of births. So we don't need to conduct a survey anymore. If they've come to Hong Kong, they become part of the Hong Kong population, then they will be able to identify these people by census. Of course, they were born a few years ago. We are now monitoring the situation and see whether or not the intention is more or less the same as what they indicated a few years ago. Mr. Kim, I was just going to ask a question about children born of non-local parents, because they have serious impact on education and welfare in the future. Within this council, several members have asked the same question. That is, for these children crossing the border to study in Hong Kong, how many of them are born of one parent or two parents who are non-Hong Kong residents? There's no such distinction. We only have the overall number of children crossing the border to attend school. So for this special cohort of our population, in our forthcoming by census or in a focus study, is there a better way for us to find out, for us to find out about the trends so that we can come up with solutions? For example, whether or not we need to increase the number of classrooms or the number of schools or teachers, and the distribution of the different classes in a school. We need the latest information, updated information before we can do that. So is there a better way, that is, for these children who cross the border to attend school? At least you should find out how many of them are born to single, one or two parents who are not Hong Kong residents. Otherwise, you will not be able to make accurate projections. I think the survey regarding their intention for children born of non-Hong Kong residents, I think half of them would tend to come to Hong Kong, intend to come to Hong Kong and study. As more and more of these children come, they will become part of the Hong Kong population. Perhaps I'll ask our colleague to answer the other question. Mr. Lam. On the one hand, at the time they were born, we already asked them about their intention. How many of them will come back to Hong Kong? How many will not? How many will cross the border to attend school? we already have information regarding their preferences or intentions. Of course, we would also need to verify whether or not they indeed come back to Hong Kong to live or to study. So far, the current information more or less match with the intention they gave us before. Madam Chair, I think the problem now is a very serious one. The number of children crossing the border to attend school, according to my study, those born of single Hong Kong parent is less than 10%. In the 2007 study, it was 50%. The problem is that we don't know when these children will come. The intention survey in 2007 doesn't have very much reference value. We're now already in 2013, and your by-census will be held in 2016. So is there a better way? I understand that this is a very difficult cohort to survey because it's not very stable. But we do need to come up with a new way to help us, understand the situation better. Okay, Mr. Gary Fan, I have two questions. One is also about children born of parents who are not local residents, and also the question of domestic migration. Regarding children born of non-Hong Kong resident parents, the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Education have told us many times that we don't know when they will come, how long they will stay, how many will come. So at the policy level, it's difficult for us to make a long-term plan. The P1 and kindergarten places have serious shortages in all districts, reflect exactly this kind of problem. So has the CNS department consider whether or not you can take samples of the parents of these children in the mainland to find out roughly how many of. So since we are having difficulties when we formulate policies, have you consider taking a 10% sample of these parents and interview them at their homes so that the Policy Bureau will get a better picture? Secondly, the domestic migration issue. The two questions you asked is ask the person who's been interviewed where they are at the time of the interview and where they lived 5 years earlier. I understand that the housing problem is a serious issue in Hong Kong. Very often people need to move once every 2 or 3 years. So is there any way for you to have more detailed information so that you can study the housing demand, and also whether you will consider implementing policies around control? Could you ask people where they lived a year ago and 2 years ago, and information like that? Mrs. Zhao Yang, to answer the first question regarding children born of non-Hong Kong parents, after we've know about the intention, we can, according to the administrative record, check the number of them who come and whether they tally with the intention they gave us earlier. Of course, they would only come to Hong Kong sometime after they are born, but there are some administrative records that we can analyze and compare to see whether or not there's any discrepancies with the intentions that they've declared. And we'll take some, after some time we can come to a conclusion. Over the last few years, we found that it more or less matched the intention they gave. As for the question of interviewing these people in the mainland, it would involve another jurisdiction, and if we have this objective in the long term, then we need to work on that. What do you mean by that? We may need to work through the Policy Bureau to liaise with our counterparts in the mainland as to how we can conduct the census or the survey in the mainland, because it will not be done in Hong Kong. Would it be possible for the CNS department to be the coordinator? We need the policy in place before we can conduct surveys and census outside of Hong Kong. We've once thought that when these children born of non-Hong Kong parents come to Hong Kong for vaccination, they would need to declare an address. But then we realize sometimes that the address they give us will not be authentic. So if we need to conduct a poll, then we have to talk, in the mainland, we need to talk to the mainland authorities. But there are some records in the maternity ward which will give us the addresses of these children, and then we can mail them the questionnaire. But we don't know how many of them will return the questionnaire. So it's only exploratory. So I'm saying that these are the several issues that we need to be considered. The survey we did 5 years ago was a standard survey because people in Hong Kong very often move, so very often in census by census we always ask the same question. In other countries they also have they also ask the respondent whether they have moved. If it's only 1 or 2 years, normally we will not recommend doing it so frequently. Madam Chair, I'd like to strongly request that the government in the 2016 by census collect data regarding the information relating to people of different sexual orientation. In schedule regarding gender and marital status, you say you are considering to perfecting the categories, including transgenders and transsexuals. So, does your present consideration cover homosexuals? And when will you be able to come to a decision? Mr. Tam Chi Yuen, at a special FA meeting in April this year, said that the policy direction of the government is to promote the interests or rights of the people of different sexual orientation. If the government is going to launch a policy against a particular ethnic group, and if you don't have data concerning that group of people, how can you come up with a policy? If you're talking about the 10,000 people or 100,000 people, the policy required, the resources, the implication will be different. So I think that is a theoretical basis. In the electrical brief in para 19, and again, some members have also requested that you collect more information regarding the underprivileged, including the ethnic, those with different sexual orientations. Although collecting this information is rather sensitive, I'd like to point out that by sensitive, it would depend on the place and so. I mean, if you ask a girl how old she is, it could also be a very sensitive question. So I'd like to ask, what are the causes, what are the risks, and what are the difficulties? Is it because if you ask them too many questions, they will not answer your question, or would they lie to you? Is that the difficulties you face? What about the risks? Is it is the risk that these people simply refuse to be interviewed?
Well, in relation to sex and marital status, for the 16BC, we are considering the categorization. Generally speaking, for sex, we have either male or female, and currently we have got others. I think we have already looked at the experience in other places like Canada and Australia. They intend to do this in future census, that is to have a third sex being included. In your paper, you mentioned sensitivity. We try to learn from overseas experience, and we will bear in mind the local circumstances. And we hope that the respondent will not be asked a question under pressure. It will require certain skills. So for sex, we will have a third option. For Canada and Australia, they are more advanced in this regard. Australia is going to do it, and then Canada is also going to do it in the next census. For same-sex marriage or cohabitation, it means that we have got the same-sex couples. In the past, we didn't have them separately classified. In the coming by census, we intend to ask the question clearly. In the 2011 census of Canada, they did have same-sex relationship or common law marriage being offered as a choice. We intend to ask for the experience in Canada and Australia. International experience will be important because even for locally conducted census, we need to learn from the progress made elsewhere. So for our classifications, there will be a breakthrough as to how we are going to overcome the difficulties and how we can learn from others' experience to improve our skills. Of course, it is an area that we have to put in more efforts. And for this by census, we are talking about breakthrough. Madam Chair, if you want to ask questions, you need to queue up for the second time. We've already overrun by 10 minutes. Allow me to exercise my discretion. I think we cannot go beyond 1 o'clock. Sit home. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to follow up on Raymond's question. I welcome the government's willingness to include the information, but what is the purpose of getting the information? Are you going to change your policies? If you want to change your policies, you can't simply ask this question. For same-sex relationship and for homosexuals, they are not going to tell you if they haven't sort of make known their sexual orientation. So it's a matter of whether the respondent is willing to answer. In our background brief, we understand that such questions are very sensitive. Now, if the respondent is in the presence of other family members, and if they have not already made known their sexual orientation, so they would not be willing to answer the question. So the data will be wrong, and then this will affect the formulation of policies and planning. So I'm afraid that if you start to ask in this way, you will not be able to get the picture. In the past, in 1999, when we asked the question about rights of a vote, we try to use an indirect method, and then the figure given was 1.67 million. In other words, for every 2 men in Hong Kong, one had a child in the mainland. So for such sensitive information, please no longer use the previous method of drawing the film case used in the past. So we want to get the accurate data concerning such sensitive topics. Mrs. Ao Yang, for census and by census, it's a large-scale project. We won't be making use of very unique methods as to whether people may not be giving you the right answer, and therefore there may be an underestimation. Well, this possibility is in existence. Therefore, for the by census, in the year 2015, we are going to have a pilot scheme. Tens of thousands of households will be involved. We are talking about 300,000 households in the by census. 20,000 will be involved in the pilot scheme in 2015, and then the outcome can tell us as to whether there will be a lot of underestimation. Madam Chair, allow Mrs. Ao Yan to finish with her answer. We can also tell whether there are difficulties in asking the questions. So all such can be verified in the test. For new topics, new classifications, again, we need to study the matter. It depends on the information gathered internationally as to what's the experience of overseas countries. When they encounter problems, of course, we can learn from the experience. In Hong Kong, for a number of years, I think the tendency is towards more opening up. I believe that not many people would be reluctant or resist such questions. Mr. Ho said that family members' presence may affect a respondent's willingness to tell the truth. maybe we can try to make arrangements to make sure that the interviewer can get the answer. So all such issues that should be attended to. And we hope that the outcome of the test will be successful. If not, then the data is not of value, and then we have to reconsider the matter. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, my question is along the same line. Here we want to get data. Yes, I understand that the CNSD is very skillful. You have had census since 1966. I think for local data, you are able to get a complete picture. But then we are having more and more interaction with the mainland. Just now in your reply, you said that if the questions had to be asked on the mainland, you needed the assistance from mainland authorities. I agree with part of your answer. For Hong Kong citizens working on the mainland or residing on the mainland, and for mainlanders coming to Hong Kong to live or to work, if we want to ask questions, do you think that there are other channels? Now you apply for $18 million. You want to have a paperless channel. Does it mean that you just issue an iPad to the enumerator to carry out the interview? No. I think it will be difficult to gather the information, but I don't think you must send somebody up to the mainland to get the information. It's a matter of sending the questionnaires to, say, for example, Guangdong province or a particular location in Shanghai. We have to work through the established procedures, and then the National Statistics Bureau want to know about the case of type 2 babies, and then we need to explain the matter to the various departments and authorities, and they may have other proposals. Perhaps they can make use of the administrative means to provide the information. They may think that a survey may not actually be the best way to go about it. You haven't finished with your discussion or whether you think that administratively it is desirable, but just that the negotiation hasn't been completed. So the question is, do you think that you should conduct such a survey? I think this can be studied. Studied? What do you mean? What about the by census 2016? Are going to cover this as well? For this topic, if we want to include a topic in the census, we have to find out whether it is appropriate. I believe that such information can be gathered in the format of a thematic survey or other administrative means. Last, for the first round of my question, a few questions to follow up. Housing, like the number of subdivided units. I think you will improve upon the consultant's report. I will insist that even if you can't do it on this occasion, in future exercises, when enumerators conduct a detailed inquiry, they should be trained to be able to tell whether it is a SDU or not. I don't think it is something that is that difficult. Unless you have a complete head count and a census, you cannot really get the full picture about the SDUs. Second point is about the size of the housing unit. It is only meaningful you've got both the household size as well as the floor space of the unit. And then the third question is about type 2 students, type 2 babies who become students, as well as cross-boundary school children. I think you told us that you would ask about their intentions. But if you don't liaise with them regularly, it will be difficult to tell whether they're really interested to come back to Hong Kong. So do you have any new ideas in this regard? And then fourthly, people who work regularly on the mainland, would it be covered in this exercise, or whether you can derive the figure in a reasonable way upon the outcome from the exercise? And how many elders have retired to the mainland? Is it possible to get this information? For those working on the mainland, we do have thematic surveys that are regular. The data can be collected, and then we can have thematic reports. And we announced the results as well. For elders who retired to the mainland, well, there are two groups. First, if they have retired to the mainland and remained there for a long time, they're no longer Hong Kong residents. And then there are others who may have retired to the mainland, but from time to time they come back to Hong Kong. And then we have to find out whether they are the transient population or the permanent residents in Hong Kong. Again, we have thematic surveys to cover them. So for both cases, they belong to the realm of thematic studies or thematic surveys. As to the floor space, generally speaking, we ask for the number of rooms in the residence, including living rooms, bedrooms, kitchens, and bathrooms. For the floor space or the floor area, I think it involves measurement. It will be difficult to get quality data from an interview like this, so we do not intend to include the size of the residence. For SDUs, last time a consultant collected the information from us. We had a very detailed discussion with the consultant. It was said that it would be highly technical. We are going to get 5,000 or so tertiary study students. I don't think technically they would acquire the skills to tell us accurately whether a residence is a SDU. Whenever we encroach upon housing characteristics, it is another realm of statistical work. We need a very detailed analysis in a highly technical sense. So if it is not SDU and yet it is regarded as an SDU, then it will prejudice the quality of the data. For such surveys carried out by tertiary students as enumerators, we really have to be sure that they can deliver the service adequately. So I believe that in terms of the SDUs, I believe it is difficult to include it as part of the census. Two members in the second round, 2 minutes each. Mr. Raymond Chen. My first question was clear. Currently, does the administration intend to collect the number of homosexuals in the population? And then the commissioner said that other than male, female, there would be a third option. Perhaps she is not clear about the distinction between sexual orientation and sexual recognition or identification. So for me, I will still take the box male. So does it mean that the commissioner doesn't have plan to gather information about homosexuals? In other words, the number of people of different sexual orientation. Sorry, because of the time limit, I wasn't able to cover that. There is another question about marital status. For marital status, for the classifications, if it is a same-sex relationship or same-sex cohabitation, it means that it involves same-sex couples. So we'll try to find out what has to be taken care of in relation to such questions, and we believe that we can derive a certain figure. So this question will be asked within the marital status category. We can find out about the orientation. Orientation, sexual orientation and marital status are two different things. I do not intend to marry. It's not something that you can measure. So coming back to my original question, at the present moment, you do not intend to collect information about the homosexual population. Marital status is a matter of whether you are going to get married or you choose to cohabit. Yes, sexual orientation and marital status are different and different from sexual orientation.
We will see whether they are cohabiting or whether or not they are married according to legal procedure to find out what is the size of this particular population. Regarding their orientation, at this stage, we do not intend to ask questions regarding orientation in this survey. Why do you ask questions about marriage or marital status, but you do not find out the number of people in our population who have different sexual orientation? Well, in the population by census, even for marital status, we have to explore whether or not we can really ask those questions. If you talk about orientation, it's even more difficult to collect information. If two people are living together, it's nothing to do with two people. Why do you let him respond first? I think the question is relatively difficult to ask. So I think it's more appropriate to conduct thematic surveys to collect such information, because you will be able to collect more accurate information. Why didn't you simply set a category of, homosexuals and heterosexuals? I think the methodology for the survey will only enable you to find out people who've come out and admit they are homosexuals or people are cohabiting. But there are other people who are under a lot of pressure and people who are not able to freely form their own family. If they cannot form their own family, live independently and still living with the families, you're going to ask them the questions. And in the presence of family members, they may not dare tell you the truth. That's why my first question is, what is the target of your survey? If you only want to find out how many people have different sexual orientation who are living independently or have to, and then you will consider how amending your future housing policy. Well, but the policy objective we want is how many people are not able to freely live independently or form their own family because of the pressure they're under. So I think the CNS department should talk to organizations of people with different sexual orientation, and they can give you the information and advise you how you can ask such sensitive questions. I also agree that there should be a thematic survey, but you must first identify these people first before you have the subjects for your thematic study. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to obtain the situated knowledge because you can't find the situation. So I'd like to ask the administration to really talk to those organizations and groups to come up with a proper methodology, and then you will follow that up with a thematic study so that we can find out how many people of different sexual orientation are there. In the course of consultation, we had exchanges to these organizations. Our preliminary understanding is that the first aspiration is that in our bi-census we will incorporate these categories. Regarding the potential, the number of people with such orientation, I fully agree that we should find out through thematic studies or surveys, and that we should ask the right questions to get the correct answers. I will certainly liaise with the relevant organizations again to see how we can work together. But for 2016, I'd like to reaffirm again, there will there won't be a part covering the people with different sexual orientation. Now, all the information you want to collect are collected through questionnaires and also thematic interviews. So the data would come from the subject. You will not validate them again. Why is it that you believe it's more accurate for them to give you accurate information about the income, but not about the size of the premises? In previous surveys and censuses, the high income groups will underreport the income. The low income groups normally will give us more accurate figures. That has been the tendency that we have found, the tendency of underreporting. Regarding the size of premises, over the years, we would only count the number of units. It may not be quantitative, but qualitative figures. That is, we ask them the number of rooms there are in the premises. But in the course of the survey, we found that sometimes the subjects themselves are not very clear, and the enumerators will have many difficulties. Well, I think this is a rather common problem. If you want to find out about the size of premises, I believe there are, unless you, I mean, even income is a range. When people ask people what is the income, they give us a range. If you talk about the size of the premises, in future, as whether or not we should ask the subject about a range, for example. So even if you want, there might be difficulties even for the subjects to provide information. But we can still explore asking a question which specifies a range. If you talk about the number of SDUs, I don't know, I mean, a flat with 3 independent rooms and a flat with 3 subdivided units are very much different. 4 people, 4 premises, 500 square feet, I think they can accommodate 4 or 5 people. I think you should ask them, about the size of the premises by asking them to choose a range. I think in a census you have the subject being interviewed has the legal obligation to provide accurate information. This time we're going to ask questions about people's different sexual orientation, and if they're afraid and they dare not give you the truth and they have to bear the legal responsibility, that would be disastrous. And there's no ways for you to protect the privacy. I hope they will give us detailed information later on in this regard. Well, this item requires, as a financial implication, so if members do not object, then please, take note of members' concern when you go to the FA meeting. Chairman, there's no objection from members. Okay, with that we can wrap up. Any other business? If not, we may now adjourn. Thank you.